everyone. I'm Melissa here, and welcome to your Melissa Moment. Hello, everyone. Melissa here. Welcome to your Melissa Moment, and welcome to Turn the Page Thursday. This is day 3 of our brand new series, Book Club, where we are reading Stephen King's You Like It Darker. Let's jump right in, because last week, his father, elderly father, shattered his hip and has decided to get surgery. But because of his age, he may not make it through the surgery. So he has given his son a key to his desk drawer that is supposed to have the answer to the secret question, how did he and his friends gain their success? We're not sure, but it's a mystery. Something happened to them that they went from not being successful and being just an ordinary person to both being extremely successful and becoming celebrities. We don't know what that is, but we might find out this chapter. So, as I had stated before, this is a book of short stories, and the first story that we're reading, there are no chapters to it. So I just set an alarm for 30 minutes, and we read for 30 minutes, and when that alarm goes off, I finish the page we're on, and then we'll rejoin it next week. So I'm excited to find out. I have been waiting, so I want to jump right in and find out what is in that drawer, because I need to know. So, Alexa, set an alarm for 30 minutes.
30-minute alarm set for 11:45 a.m.
Let's do it. I'll tell Dr. Patel. You do that, he said, and tell him to get that painkiller train ready to roll. I love you, son. I love you too, Pop. Bring my keys back if I come through. Look in the drawer if I don't. You've got it. What was that woman's name? Crockett's? Crawford. Ruth Crawford. She wanted an answer, an explanation. The unified field theory of creativity, God save the Queen. And in the end, all I could have given her was a bigger mystery. His eyes slipped close. Whatever they gave me must have been strong. No pain now. It'll be back. But right now, I think I can sleep. He did. And never woke up. Sleep became a coma. He had signed a DNR years before. I was sitting at his bedside and holding his hand when his heart stopped at 9:19 the following evening. He didn't even get the lead obituary in the New York Times because an ex-Secretary of State died in a car accident that same night. Pop would have said, it's an old story. In death as in life, politics almost always trump art. Just about everyone in Harlow came to the funeral at Grace Baptist Church, along with a good contingent of press. Ruth Crawford didn't come. She was in California. But she sent flowers and a nice condolence note. Luckily, the funeral director knew what to expect and put speakers on the church lawn for the overflow. He offered to add video screens. I refused on the grounds that it was a funeral, not a rock concert. The graveside service was shorter and less well attended, and when I showed up a week later with flowers, daylilies of course, I was alone. The last leaf on the Carmody family tree, and now turning an autumnal brown. Sic transit gloria mundi. I knelt to prop the vase against his headstone. Hey, Pop. I've got the key you gave me. I'm going to respect your dying wish and open that drawer. But if there's anything in there that explains anything, I'll be, what did you always used to say? A monkey's testicle. The first thing I found in it was a manila folder. Either the sly dog hadn't completely given up his laptop after all, or he'd gotten someone at the library to do a printout for him, because the page on top was an article from Time magazine, dated May 23rd, 2022. The headline read, "Congress is finally taking UFOs seriously." I scanned it and learned that these days UFOs are actually called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. The congressional hearings, chaired by Adam Schiff, were the first to take place on the subject since Project Blue Book 50 years before, and everyone who testified was eager to point out that the focus wasn't on little green men from Mars or anywhere else. All witnesses said that while craft of extraterrestrial origin couldn't be ruled out, they were considered highly unlikely. What they were worried about was the possibility that some other country, Russia, China, had developed hypersonic technology far greater than our own. Below the printout were clippings, yellowed and slightly brittle, from September and October 1978. One of the Press Herald was headlined, "Mysterious Light Spotted Over Marginal Way." The one in the Castle Rock read, "Cigar-Shaped UFO Spotted Over Castle View." There was a photo of the view, with the rusty suicide stairs, as long gone as my Uncle Butch's dump murals, zigzagging up the side. No sign of the flying white owl, though. Below the folder of clippings was a spiral notebook. I flipped back the cover, expecting to see another of Pop's early efforts, a stab at The Terrible Generation, perhaps, or Highway 19. It was his back-slanted printing, unmistakable, but there were no cross-outs, scribbles, or doodles while he struggled for a way to express what he was thinking. It wasn't a bit like the early notebooks I'd found after my mother died. This was Laird Carmody, in total command of his writing ability, although some of the letters looked shaky. I couldn't be sure, but I thought the narrative had been written at some point after he claimed retirement. Pop was a novelist in full, usually respected for his storytelling abilities, and it only took me 3 pages to decide this was another story, albeit one with real people, Laird Carmody and Dave Laverdiere, as made-up characters. Metafiction, in other words. Not uncommon, any number of fine writers have dabbled in the concept, or maybe you call that sort of thing a conceit. Dave certainly couldn't object, Pop would have thought, because his old friend was dead. If Pop had claimed it as true in his hospital room, it was only because he was addled with dope and pain. Such things happened. At the end of his life, hadn't Nathaniel Hawthorne confused himself with the Reverend Dimsdale? Didn't Emily Dickinson leave the world saying, "I must go in, the fog is rising"? My father had never written fantasy or metafiction, and this was both. But he was up to his good old tricks nevertheless. I was caught up immediately and read through the pages in the notebook without stopping, not just because I knew the people in the Harlow landscape either. Laird Carmody could always tell a story. Even his harshest critics admitted that, and this was a good one. But true? I call bullshit on that. In the old days, when Butch and I ran the town dump, we had Picker Tuesday. It was Butch's idea. We also had Rat Saturday, but that's a different story. "If they're gonna pick," Butch said, We should give 'em a day to do it, when we can watch out for 'em and make sure some juicer or pothead doesn't gash a leg or get gangrene. And old Elkie, who showed up more Tuesdays than not, was Rennie Lacasse. He was what Maine folks called a ratchet jaw, probably even talked in his sleep. Whenever he got talking about the old days, he'd always begin by saying, "That picture never escaped my memory." That's how I feel about the hunting trip in 1978 that changed our lives. Those pictures have never escaped my memory. We left on November 11th of that year, a Saturday, and the plan was to be back on the 17th or 18th, maybe earlier, if one or both of us got our deer. If we did, we'd have plenty of time to get them dressed out at Ordway's butcher shop at Gates Falls. Everyone enjoyed venison at Thanksgiving, especially Mark, who was due home from college on the 21st. Butch and I clubbed together to buy an Army surplus Willys Jeep back in the early 50s. By 1978, she was an old lady, but still perfect for loading up our gear and groceries and bucketing off into the woods. Sheila used to tell me every year that Nellie Bell was going to throw a rod or drop her transmission somewhere in the 30-mile, but she never did. We drove that Willys out there until Butch headed west. Only we didn't do much hunting after 1978. We even avoided the subject. Although we thought about it, of course. Hard not to. By then, I'd sold my first book, and Butch was making money doing comics and graphic novels. Nothing like the money he made later, but a country fair, as Rennie Lacasse might have said. I kissed Sheila, Butch gave her a hug, and off we went. Chapel Road took us to Cemetery Road, then to Three Woods Road, each more overgrown than the last. By then we were deep in the 30-mile, and pretty soon we could hear Jalassie Creek. Some years it wasn't much more than a chuckle, but that summer and fall we'd had buckets of rain, and old Jalassie was roaring. "I hope the bridge is still there," Butch said. It was, but listing a bit to starboard. There was a yellow sign nailed to a stanchion with one word on it: unsafe. When the spring runoff came the next year, the bridge washed out entirely. After that, you'd have to go 20 miles downstream to cross the Jalassie, damn near to Bethel. We didn't need the sign. It had been years since we dared to drive across that bridge, and that day we weren't sure we even dared walk across it. "Well," Butch said, "I'll be damned if I'm going to drive 20 miles down Route 119 and then 20 miles back." "You'd be pulled over by a cop for sure if you tried," I said, and slapped the side of the Willys. "Nellie Bell hasn't had an inspection sticker on her since 1964. He grabbed his pack and his sleeping bag and walked to the edge of that clattery old wooden bridge. There he stopped and looked back. "You coming?" "I think I'll wait and see if you make it across," I said. "If the bridge goes, I'll fish you out. And if the current takes you before I can, I'll wave you goodbye." I actually didn't want both of us on it at once. That would have been tempting fate. Butch started to cross. I could hear the hollow clonk of his boot heels over the sound of the creek. When he got to the other side, he put down his gear, dropped his pants, and mooned me. As I went across, I could feel the bridge trembling like it was alive and in pain. We went back, one at a time, and got the cartons with the food in them. They were full of things men eat in the woods: Dinty Moore, canned soup, sardines, eggs, bacon, pudding cups, coffee, plenty of Wonder Bread, 2 6-packs of beer, and our annual bottle of Jack Daniels. Also a couple of T-bone steaks. We were big eaters in those days, although far from healthy ones. On the last trip, we brought our rifles and the first aid kit. It was a big one. Both of us were members of the Harlow Volunteer Fire Department, and the EMT first aid training course was a requirement. Sheila insisted we drag the VFD kit with us for our hunting week, because accidents can happen in the woods, sometimes bad ones. As we tarped Nellie Bell to keep her from filling up with rain, Butch said, "This is the time one of us will go in the drink. You wait and see." We didn't, although that last trip we had to make together, one holding each end of the first aid kit, which weighed 30 pounds and was the size of a footlocker. We talked about leaving it in the Jeep, but in the end we didn't. On the far side of the bridge, there was a little clearing. It would have been a nice place to fish, except the Jalassie ran through Mexico and Rumford before it got to us, and any fish we caught would be toxic because of the runoff from the textile mills. Beyond the clearing was an overgrown path that led a quarter of a mile to our cabin. It was neat enough then, with 2 men, a wood-fired cook stove in the kitchen, half of the main room, and a composting toilet out back. No electricity, of course, but there was a little pump house for water, all a couple of mighty hunters could possibly want. By the time we got our gear bucked up to the cabin, it was almost dark. I made a meal. Butch was always willing to do his share, but that man would burn water, Sheila used to say. And Butch built a fire in the fireplace. I settled down with a book. There's nothing like an Agatha Christie when you're out in the woods. And Butch had a Strathmore drawing pad, which he would fill with cartoons, caricatures, and forest scenes. His Nikon was on the table beside him. Our rifles were propped in the corner, unloaded. We talked a little, as we always did up there, some about the past, some about our hopes for the future. Those hopes were fading by then. We were in our early middle age, but there always seemed a little more realistic, a little more attainable out in the woods, where it was always so quiet and life seemed less busy. That's not exactly right. Less cluttered. No phones to ring and no fires, literal as well as metaphorical, to put out. I don't think we ever went into the woods to hunt, not really. Although if a deer walked into our sights, who were we to say no? I think we went out there to be our best selves. Well, our honest selves, maybe. I always tried to be my best self with Sheila. I remember going to bed that night, pulling the covers up to my chin and listening to the wind sigh through the trees. I remember thinking that the fading of hopes and ambitions was mostly painless. That was good, but it was also rather horrible. I wanted to be a writer, but I was beginning to think being a good one was beyond me. If it was, the world would continue to spin. You relaxed your hands, opened your fingers, and something flew away. I remember thinking, maybe that's all right. Out the window, through the swaying branches, I could see some stars. That picture has never escaped my memory. On the 12th, we put on our orange vests and orange hats, and into the woods we went. In the morning, we separated, getting together again for lunch and to compare notes, what we'd seen and what we hadn't. That first day, we met back at the cabin, and I made a big pot of pasta with cheese and half a pound of bacon. I called this Hungarian goulash, but any self-respecting Hungarian would have taken one look and covered their eyes. That afternoon, we hunted together. The next day, we ate a picnic for lunch in the clearing, looking across the creek, which was more like a river that day, at Nellie Bell. Butch made sandwiches, which he could be trusted to do. There was sweet water from our well to drink, and hostess fruit pies for after. Blueberry for me and apple for Butch. "Did you see any deer?" Butch asked, licking frosting from his fingers. "Well, those fruit pies aren't exactly frosted, but they have a glaze that's quite tasty." Nope, not today, not yesterday. But you know what the old timers say, the deer know when November comes and they hide. I actually think that could be true, Butch said. They do have a tendency to disappear after Halloween. But what about gunshots? Heard any? I thought it over. A couple yesterday, none today. Are you going to tell me we're the only hunters in the 30 Mile? Christ, no. The woods between here and Darkscore Lake are probably the best hunting in the county. You know that. I saw a couple of guys this morning, not long after I started out. Although they didn't see me. I think one of 'em might have been that nummy Freddie Skillins, the one who likes to call himself a carpenter. He nodded. I was over on that humpback ridge, and I saw 3 men on the other side, dressed like models from L.L. Bean's and carrying scoped rifles. Just about had to be out-of-staters. And for everyone we see, there's probably 5 or 10 more. There should be plenty of bang-bang, because not all the deer decided to up stakes and head for Canada, they say. Seems unlikely, I said. The deer are out there, Butchie. And why haven't we seen them? And listen, what am I supposed to be listening Shh! Just shut up a minute. You'll hear it. By which, I mean you won't. I shut up. I heard the Jalassie roaring away, no doubt undercutting the bridge supports, even as we sat there on the grass munching the last of our fruit pies. I heard the far-off drone of an airplane, probably bound for the Portland jetport. Otherwise, nothing. I looked at Butch. He was looking at me and not smiling. Solemn. No birds, I said. No. And the woods should be full of them. Just then, a crow gave out a single loud caw. There you go, I said. Actually felt relieved. 1 crow, he said. Big deal. Where are the robins? Flown south? Not yet. Not all of them. We should be hearing nuthatches and cardinals, maybe a goldfinch, chickadees galore. But there's not even a fucking woodpecker. I usually ignore the soundtrack of the woods. You get used to it. But now that he mentioned it, where were the birds? And something else. The squirrels, I said. They should be running around everywhere getting ready for winter. I think I've seen a couple. I trailed off because I wasn't even sure of that. It's aliens, Butch said in a low, joke-spooky voice. They could be creeping toward us through the woods right now with their disintegrator ray guns. You call that story in the call. You saw that story in the call, I said. The one about the flying saucer. Wasn't a saucer, it was a cigar, Butch said. A flying cigar. The Tipperillo that came from Planet X, I said, with a lust for Earth woman. We looked at each other and snickered. I had an idea for a story that afternoon. Much later, it became a novel called The Terrible Generation, and I was making some notes in one of my spiral notebooks that evening. I was trying to think of a good name for the villainous young man at the heart of the story, when the cabin door banged open and Butch ran in. "Come here, Lair! You have to see this!" He grabbed his camera. "See what?" "Just come!" I looked at his wide eyes, put aside my notebook, and followed him out the door. While we walked the 1/4 mile to the clearing and the creek, he told me he'd come out to check if the bridge's tilt had increased. We would have heard it if it had collapsed entirely. Then he saw what was in the sky and forgot all about the bridge. "Look," he said when we got to the clearing, and pointed up. It had started to rain, just a gentle mist. It was full dark, and I shouldn't have been able to see the lowering clouds, but I could, because they were lit by slowly moving circles of bright light. 5, then 7, then 9. They were different sizes. The smallest was maybe 30 feet across. The biggest could have been 100. They weren't shining off the clouds the way a bright spotlight or a powerful flashlight will. They were in the clouds. What are they? I asked, almost whispering. I don't know, but they sure as shit aren't tipperillos or white owls, I said. And we began to laugh. Not the way you do when something's funny, the way you do when you're absolutely gobsmacked with amazement. Butch took pictures. This was years before chip technology allowed for instant gratification. But I saw the prints later, after he developed them in his own little dark room. They were disappointing. Just big circles of light above the dark jig-jags of the treetops. I've seen pictures of UFOs since then, or UAPs if you prefer, and they are usually disappointing. Blurry shapes that could be anything, including the trick photography of hoaxers. You had to be there to understand how wonderful it was, and how weird, great, soundless lights moving in the clouds, seeming almost to waltz. What I remember most clearly, other than a sense of awe, was how divided my mind was during the 5 or 10 minutes it went on. I wanted to see what was making those lights, yet I didn't. I was afraid, you see, that we were close to artifacts, maybe even intelligent beings from another world. That exalted me, but it also terrified me, looking back on that first contact, for surely it was that. I think our only two choices were to laugh or to scream. If I'd been alone, I almost certainly would have screamed, and run away, probably to hide under my bed like a child and deny I'd seen anything. Because we were together and grown men, we laughed. I say 5 or 10 minutes, but it might have been 15. I don't know. It was long enough for the drizzle to thicken into real rain. 2 of the bright circles grew smaller, then disappeared. Then 2 or 3 more went. The biggest stayed the longest. Then it also began to dwindle. It didn't move from side to side, simply shrank to the size of a plate, then a 50-cent piece, then a penny, then a brilliant dot, then gone, as if it had shot straight up. We stood there in the rain, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a while, Butch grabbed my shoulder. I gave a squawk. Sorry, he muttered. Let's go in. Light show's over and we're getting soaked. That was what we did. I hadn't bothered to put on a jacket, so I built up the fire, which had been down to coals, and stripped off my wet shirt. I was rubbing my arms and shivering. We can tell people what we saw, but they won't believe it, Butch said. Or they'll shrug and say it was some crazy weather phenomenon. Maybe it was. Or, how far away is the Castle Rock airport? He shrugged. Has to be 20 or 30 miles east of here. The runway lights. Maybe with the clouds, the moisture, it could, some prismatic effect. He was sitting on the couch, camera in his lap, looking at me, smiling just a little, saying nothing. He didn't have to. That's bullshit, isn't it? I said. Yes. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't lights from the airport, and it wasn't a fucking weather balloon. There were 8 or 10 of those things, maybe a dozen, and they were big. There were other hunters in the woods. I saw Freddie Skillings, and you saw 3 guys who were probably Flatlanders. They could have seen it. Maybe they did, but I doubt it. I just happened to be in the right place, that clearing on the edge of the creek, at the right time. In any case, it's over and I'm going to bed. It rained all the next day, the 14th. That would have been. Neither of us wanted to go out and get soaked looking for deer we probably couldn't find. I read and worked a little bit on the idea of my story. I kept trying to come up with a good name for the bad kid and didn't have any luck. Maybe because I didn't have a clear fix on why the bad kid was bad. Butch spent most of the morning with his pad. He drew 3 different pictures of the lights in the clouds, then gave up in disgust. I hope the photos come out because these suck, he said. I looked them over and told him they were good, but they weren't. They didn't suck, but they didn't convey the strangeness of what we'd seen, the enormity. I looked at all the crossed out names of my proposed bad guy. Trig Adams. No. Vic Ellenby. No. Jack Claygart. 2 on the nose. Carter Cantwell. Oh, puke. The story I had in mind seemed amorphous. I had an idea, but no specifics. Nothing to hold on to. It reminded me of what we'd seen the previous night. Something was there, but it was impossible to tell what, because it was in the clouds. "What are you doing?" Butch asked me. "Fucking off. I think I'll take a nap." "What about lunch?" "Don't want any." He considered this, then looked out the window at the steady rain. Nothing is colder than cold November rain. It crossed my mind that someone should write a song about it. And eventually, someone did. Alexa, cancel. "A nap sounds like just the ticket," Butch said. He put his pad aside and stood up. "Tell you something, Lair. I'm going to draw all my life, but I'll never be an artist." The rain stopped around 4 o'clock that afternoon. By 6, the clouds had unraveled and we could see stars and a silver moon. God's fingernail, the old-timers say. We ate our steaks for dinner, along with plenty of Wonder Bread to sop up the juice. Then went out to the clearing. We didn't think about it, just went. We stood there for maybe half an hour, craning our necks. There were no lights, no saucers, no flying cigars. We went back inside. Butch found a pack of bicycles in the living room cabinet, and we played cribbage until almost 10 o'clock. "I can hear the jealousy even in here," I said as we finished the last hand. "I know. The rain didn't do the bridge any help." Why is there a fucking bridge there anyway? Did you ever ask yourself that? I think someone had an idea for a development back in the 60s. Or pulpers. They must have clear-cut the woods back then before World War I. What would you think about hunting one more day and going back? I had an idea he was thinking of more than going home, most likely empty-handed. Seeing those lights in the clouds had done something to him. Could have done something to both of us. I'm not going to call it a come-to-Jesus moment. It's just that maybe you see something, lights in the sky or a certain shadow at a certain time of day, how it lies across your path. You take it as a sign and decide to move along. You say to yourself that when I was a child, I spoke as a child, understood as a child, thought as a child, but there comes a time to put away childish things. Or it could have been nothing. Lair? Sure. One more day, then we'll go back. I have to clean the gutters before the snow flies, and I keep putting it off. The next day was cool and clear and perfect for hunting, but neither of us saw so much as a single flick of a single whitetail. I heard no bird song, just the occasional crow call. I kept an eye out for squirrels, but didn't see any. I didn't even see a chipmunk, and the woods should have been full of their scurry. I heard some gunshots, but they were far away, near the lake, and hunters shooting didn't mean they were shooting a deer. Sometimes guys just get bored and want to let off a round or two, especially if they've decided there's no game to scare away. We met back at the cabin for lunch, then went out together. We no longer expected to see deer, and we didn't. But it was a fine day to be outdoors. We walked along the creek for a mile or so, then sat on a fallen log and opened cans of Bud. This just isn't natural, Butch said, and I don't care for it much. I'd say drive out this afternoon, but by the time we got loaded up, it'd be dark, and I don't trust Nellie Bell headlights on those wood roads. Well, folks, I think we're going to end for today. I'm just trying to see how much of this story is left. Oh, my goodness. How much of this story is left? There's still a lot. I think we probably have 2 more days before this story ends. Well, it sounds like it's going to be UFOs. I didn't see that one coming. But maybe not. Maybe they're just talking about it right now. He hasn't quite told us how they became famous yet. Interesting, though. That is it for today's Turn the Page. Stephen King, You Like It Darker. Make sure if you are enjoying this, you give me a thumbs up. Constructive criticism is always welcome, but I am looking forward to next week where we maybe find out a little more information about what happened in those woods. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, we'll see you next time. Bye.